He took his kids to a quiet roadside diner. But when his daughter pointed at the waitress and whispered, "Daddy, she looks just like Mommy," he turned around. And his world shattered. His wife was supposed to be dead. The air inside the dusty roadside diner felt heavy, laced with the scent of burnt coffee and old grease. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in rural Wyoming, and the world outside was as still as the silence at the table where Grayson Rose sat with his 6-year-old twins, Randall and Livy. The three of them looked like shadows of a once whole family, quiet, reserved, as though laughter had long since become foreign to them. 2 years had passed since the fire that had taken Cassidy from them, or so the authorities had said. She was working as a biochemist at a high-security research facility outside of Cheyenne when the explosion happened. No body had ever been found, just remains too charred to identify and a statement from the government, presumed dead. But Grayson never stopped wondering. Something about it never sat right. And yet, with 2 small children depending on him, he buried his suspicions under the crushing weight of grief. Livy sat across from him now, swinging her feet off the booth seat, a chocolate milkshake in her hand. Her curls bounced slightly as she leaned closer and tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "That waitress looks like Mommy." Grayson didn't move at first. The words hit him like a slap. He was used to the twins bringing up their mother from time to time, a dream, a memory, a photo, but this was different. Livy wasn't reminiscing. She was pointing. Slowly, he turned. Behind the counter, wearing a deep burgundy apron and pouring coffee for a table of truckers, stood a woman who made his breath catch in his throat. She was younger looking than Cassidy had been, or maybe just untouched by the grief he remembered on his wife's face in their final months. But the resemblance was uncanny. The same high cheekbones. The same sharp green eyes. Even the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, it was Cassidy's gesture. One he'd memorized 100 times over. Grayson's fingers clenched around his mug. He felt the ground shift beneath him. It couldn't be her. Cassidy was gone. Gone like smoke. But what if she wasn't? Randall looked up from his plate of pancakes and followed his sister's gaze. "She really does look like Mommy," he said, more curious than emotional. Grayson stood up, his legs unsteady, and made his way slowly toward the counter, every step driven by a mix of dread and desperate hope. His hands were trembling. For the first time in years, something inside him stirred, a feeling he didn't know how to name yet. It was the beginning of everything unraveling. Or maybe, just maybe, of everything finally coming together. Grayson stood frozen at the edge of the counter, his breath shallow, eyes locked on the woman behind it. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a sterile glow over the cracked linoleum floor and faded ketchup bottles, but Grayson noticed none of it. All his senses had narrowed to her, the waitress who moved with a grace and rhythm so achingly familiar it clawed at his insides. She turned, briefly catching his gaze. Her face was composed, polite. She offered a small, professional smile, the kind strangers gave each other in passing. But to Grayson, it felt like being pierced through the chest. "Hi there," she said. "Can I get you anything?" Her voice. Not exactly the same as Cassidy's. There was a subtle rasp to it, like someone who'd smoked a few too many cigarettes or screamed too hard one night long ago. But underneath that, buried in the cadence and softness, there it was, the echo of the woman he had loved and lost. Grayson's voice caught. He swallowed hard. "I'm good. Thank you." She nodded and turned away, not recognizing him. Not flinching. Not even a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Her name tag read Adrian, written in block letters on a piece of plastic pin just above her heart. He stared at the name. Cassidy's middle name had been Adrian. No one ever called her that, except once, in jest, when they were first dating and she joked she'd go by her fancy name if she ever went into politics. His chest tightened. Grayson returned to the booth in a haze. Livy was sipping her milkshake again, but her eyes remained on the woman behind the counter. She didn't say hi, Livy whispered. Grayson placed a hand on her head gently. She doesn't know us, sweetheart. But, she's mommy, Livy insisted, her little voice filled with certainty. Grayson couldn't argue. Not yet. Not until he knew what he was dealing with. Later, as the children finished their food, he found his eyes drifting back to Adrian, watching her serve tables, laugh with the cook in the back, casually flip a coffee cup in her hand before pouring it with practiced ease. The familiarity wasn't just in her face. It was in her movements, her posture, the slight twist of her wrist as she wrote down an order. These were details only a husband would remember. And then he noticed something else. When she walked past a mirror near the back hallway, she didn't look at her reflection. Not even a glance. It wasn't hesitation or vanity, it was avoidance. The kind born from trauma. Could it be possible? Could Cassidy have survived, only to forget who she was? Grayson waited until the kids were distracted with coloring books before standing and approaching the register. Adrian was wiping down the counter, her sleeves rolled up to reveal a faint, faded scar along her forearm. He knew that scar. He'd helped her bandage it after a hiking accident in Montana, 5 years ago. I'm sorry, he said quietly. But, have we met before? Adrian looked up, confused. Her smile remained, but it was thinner now. I don't think so, she said kindly. You seem very familiar. She gave a small, polite shrug. I get that sometimes. I must have one of those faces. He wanted to ask more, about the scar, the name, the voice. But she turned, distracted by another customer, and the moment was gone. Grayson walked back to the table with his mind in chaos. He couldn't tell the kids anything. Not yet. He needed answers first, real ones. If Cassidy was alive, if she was truly here in this nowhere town, working in this worn-out diner, why didn't she remember them? And more terrifying still, who had made her forget? That night, after putting Randall and Livy to bed in the modest roadside motel room just off Highway 89, Grayson sat alone at the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at a contact he hadn't called in years, Langston Beck. A former military intelligence officer turned private investigator, Langston was one of the few people Grayson still trusted implicitly. He had saved Grayson's life once in Kandahar, and more importantly, he never asked questions he didn't want answers to. Grayson hit call. The line picked up on the second ring. Ro, came the low, gravelly voice. Hell of a voice to hear this late. What's going on? Grayson didn't waste time. I think I saw Cassidy. There was a long pause. As in. Cassidy, your dead wife. I know how it sounds, Grayson said, pressing the heel of his hand into his eye. But I swear to God, Lang, she's alive. Or someone who looks just like her. Same scar. Same eyes. Same everything. You sure you're not just seeing ghosts? She didn't recognize me. She goes by Adrian now. Works at a diner in Thorn Ridge, Wyoming. But it's her, Langston. I'd bet my life on it. Langston's voice lowered. You still have the file I pulled for you? About that fire? Yeah, Grayson said. But it didn't tell me anything new. Government classified it as an accident. Said her remains were unrecoverable. Langston exhaled slowly. All right. I'll be there in 2 days. Grayson hung up, relief washing over him like cold water. If anyone could dig up what really happened to Cassidy, it was Langston. The next day, Grayson kept the kids busy with hikes and ice cream while he watched Adrian from a distance. She moved through her shift with ease, smiling at customers, laughing softly at the cook's bad jokes. She wasn't acting. She truly didn't seem to know him. But she also never talked about her past. Whenever another waitress asked where she was from, Adrian deflected with a vague Montana or a shrug. No pictures. No family. No friends outside work. And she never stayed past her shift. Grayson noticed something else. A man in a gray windbreaker, sitting in a booth near the window, watching her. He nursed a cup of coffee for nearly an hour, never touched his food. When Adrian accidentally knocked over a salt shaker, the man tensed, just slightly. Like he was too focused, too alert. Not a customer. Not a local. Grayson memorized his face. That night, Langston arrived in a battered black SUV, his laptop bag slung over one shoulder and a folder under his arm. They met at a dive bar on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes and ears. "You were right," Langston said, sliding the folder across the table. "Cassidy's name shows up again, 3 months after the fire." Grayson leaned forward. "Where?" "A funding request linked to a government project called Recursion. Coded black. Focused on memory inhibition through neurochemical therapy. They list her as a consultant. That's not just suspicious, it's impossible, unless she survived and was moved." Grayson felt his hands go cold. Why would they fake her death? Langston met his eyes. Because someone wanted her off the grid. And if she's alive but doesn't remember who she is, then someone wiped her mind. Deliberately. Grayson sat back, stunned. He thought he'd come to Thorn Ridge chasing a ghost. But now it looked like Cassidy had never died at all, she'd been stolen. And whoever took her, might be watching even now. The following morning, Grayson left the kids with a local babysitter recommended by the motel manager, using the excuse that he needed to run errands. He parked across from the diner, eyes locked on the back entrance. Adrian, no, Cassidy, would be arriving soon for her morning shift. He didn't plan on confronting her inside again. This time, he would wait until she was alone. At 6:42 a.m., she appeared. Hair pulled back, no makeup, a simple navy blue jacket over her uniform. She walked with a purposeful step, her face unreadable. Grayson got out of his truck and approached from the side alley just as she turned the corner to the employee's entrance. "Adrian," he called softly. She stopped, startled. Her eyes widened with cautious surprise as she turned toward him. "It's you again," she said. Her voice wasn't cold, just careful. "I just need a moment," he said, his tone gentle. "Please." She hesitated. "All right. But make it quick." They stood under the overhang of the back porch, rain just beginning to fall in soft drizzles around them. Grayson's chest was tight, his words trying to come out in the right order. "I know you don't remember me. But I know you're someone else. Someone I lost 2 years ago." Adrian looked down, visibly uncomfortable. "I've heard some weird things working here, but this is new." He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a folded photo. "Please. Just look." She took the picture reluctantly. In it, Cassidy, she, sat in a sunlit field, Randall and Livy laughing in her arms. Her face, radiant and carefree, was unmistakable. Adrienne's fingers trembled. She blinked rapidly. This isn't me." "Yes," Grayson said, his voice low. "It is. That's our daughter on your left. Livy. And that's Randall. Your scar," he pointed to her forearm, "you got it hiking with me. You fell near Dead Horse Trail. 5 stitches. You refused to cry." Adrienne's eyes welled with tears, and she stepped back, as though the reality was suffocating her. "I don't have children," she whispered. I woke up in a hospital in Helena, Montana 2 years ago. They told me my name was Adrian Ford. I had no ID, no memory. Just nightmares and flashes I couldn't explain." Grayson's breath caught. "Did anyone ever tell you how you ended up in that hospital?" She shook her head. They said I was found unconscious in a burned-out house. No records. No visitors. They kept me under observation for months. He clenched his fists. It wasn't a house fire. It was an explosion at a government lab. Cassidy, you were listed as one of the dead. But the body was never recovered. Adrian backed against the wall, struggling to breathe. I've had dreams, she choked out. Children. A man calling me by a name I don't recognize. Green leaves. Laughter. But I thought it was just my mind trying to fill the blanks. It's your memory, Grayson said, stepping closer. Pieces of who you really are. Someone tried to erase you. Her gaze sharpened. Why? I think you knew something. Something dangerous. My friend, he found your name tied to a project called Recursion. It dealt with memory suppression. That's no accident. Adrian closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, something shifted. A fragment of recognition flickered behind the confusion. She reached up slowly, touching the side of her head as if it ached. I need time, she said hoarsely. I need to understand all of this before I can believe it. Grayson nodded. I'm not going anywhere. I just want you to be safe. And maybe, find your way back to us. She turned toward the door, the photo still in her hand. Before she went inside, she whispered, almost too softly to hear. If I really am her, why would someone go so far to make me forget? Grayson didn't answer. Because the real question wasn't why she was made to forget. It was who still didn't want her to remember. Adrian didn't show up to work the next day. Grayson waited outside the diner from 6 in the morning until noon, nursing 2 cups of bitter coffee and staring at the door like it was a portal to another life. The regulars came and went, the line cook smoked outside during breaks, and the manager complained to a delivery guy about late shipments, but Adrian never appeared. Her absence sent a cold spike of dread through Grayson's chest. He hadn't pushed her too hard. Had he? At 12:24 p.m., his phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. Meet me where we talked yesterday. Alone. He recognized the tone instantly. It was her. 20 minutes later, he parked behind the diner and made his way around to the same narrow overhang where they'd stood in the rain. Adrian was already there, dressed in civilian clothes this time, dark jeans, a flannel shirt, no apron, no name tag. She looked different. Not just in appearance, but in presence. Her posture was more upright. Her eyes sharper. I called in sick, she said. I spent the whole night going through my apartment. Journals, receipts, photographs, whatever I could find that might tell me who I am. Did you find anything? Grayson asked. She hesitated, then pulled something from her jacket pocket. A small flash drive. This was taped to the underside of a drawer in my nightstand. I have no memory of putting it there. Grayson took it carefully. What's on it? I don't know. I don't have a computer that can open encrypted files. But the label on the drive, she swallowed. It says recursion/Cassidy Rowe. Grayson stared at the words, his chest tightening. That confirms it. Your full name, Cassidy Adrian Rowe. Adrian looked away. It still feels like you're talking about someone else. Because someone wanted it that way, Grayson said gently. Langston's digging deeper. I asked him to trace the hospital you woke up in. If we can find who brought you there, we might get a lead on who's behind this. As if on cue, Grayson's phone rang. Langston. He answered quickly. You're on speaker. I've got a partial match, Langston said. 2 weeks before she was admitted in Helena, a chopper registered to a private defense contractor, Lazurus Dynamics, landed at a remote airstrip about 20 miles outside town. Flight manifest redacted. But here's the twist, one of the co-founders of Lazarus, Dr. Elliot Knox, is a neuroscientist who worked on classified memory suppression techniques. Adrienne's face paled. So I was part of an experiment. Looks that way, Langston replied. And the recursion project? It was designed to chemically erase targeted long-term memories and replace them with stable artificial identities. They tested it on selected personnel, most of whom later disappeared or suffered accidents. Cassidy's name was the last recorded subject. Then the project was shut down and buried. Grayson felt like the air had been punched out of him. Do they know she's still alive? Langston paused. If they don't, they will soon. I traced a surveillance file. There's been a man following her. Military training, likely private contractor. They're watching, Grayson. Adrienne closed her eyes, her body trembling slightly. So that man in the gray jacket at the diner. Not a coincidence, Langston confirmed. You need to leave town. Tonight. Grayson ended the call and turned to her. We'll take the kids. Go to Langston's cabin upstate. It's off the grid. Secure. But what about my life here? Adrienne whispered. My job, my apartment, what if this isn't who I was, but who I am now? You were forced into this life, Grayson said quietly. You didn't choose it. But you have a choice now. She looked at the flash drive again. I want to know everything. Even if it hurts. Even if I remember things I don't want to. You will, Grayson said. And you won't be alone when you do. That night, with Langston's help, they packed in silence. Adrienne took only a duffel bag and the flash drive. Grayson picked up the kids from the sitter under the guise of an impromptu trip to the mountains. Randall and Livy were thrilled. By midnight, they were on the road, taillights fading into the Wyoming darkness, leaving behind the diner, the false name, and the quiet lie she'd been living. But as they drove, Adrienne kept her hand over the flash drive in her pocket. It wasn't just her past she was recovering, it was her entire stolen identity. And somewhere out there, the people who had taken it from her were beginning to notice she wasn't missing anymore. Langston's cabin stood deep in the northern Wyoming backcountry, nestled between thick pine trees and silent hills that absorbed sound like a sponge. No neighbors for miles. No cell towers. A place built to disappear. Grayson had only been there once before, after his discharge from the military, when the nightmares were still constant and the world too loud. Now, years later, it served a new purpose, a sanctuary for a woman who didn't know who she was. They arrived just after 3 a.m. The kids were asleep in the back seat, curled into each other like twin commas. Adrienne stepped out of the SUV and looked around as though stepping onto another planet. No neon lights. No chatter. Just wind and shadows and the faint creak of tall trees swaying in the dark. Grayson led her inside. The cabin was small but fortified. Thick wooden walls, reinforced windows, an underground generator, and a signal-blocking mesh woven into the roof to prevent drones or satellite pings. Langston didn't believe in half-measures. While Grayson laid the kids down on the bunk beds in the guest room, Adrienne sat at the wooden kitchen table, fingers wrapped tightly around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. The flash drive lay between her hands, a totem of everything she'd forgotten and everything she feared to learn. Langston arrived later that morning, bleary-eyed and armed with a high-powered laptop and a satchel full of encrypted hard drives. He sat up on the dining table without a word, only nodding to Adrienne with the quiet respect of a man who understood trauma without explanation. Grayson hovered behind them as Langston plugged in the flash drive and bypassed its multi-layered security. After several tense minutes, rows of files bloomed across the screen. They opened the first video file. It was Cassidy. Or rather, Adrienne, as she had been. Hair in a loose ponytail, lab coat stained with chemical residue, seated in front of a white backdrop. She looked directly at the camera. My name is Dr. Cassidy Adrienne Rowe, she said calmly. This is test subject log number 27. The recursion process appears stable in simulated environments. Memory layers are holding. Today we will attempt the third tier overwrite. Adrian gasped softly. Her hand flew to her mouth. I remember that room, she whispered. The smell of ammonia. The lights were always too bright. The next few files showed her undergoing treatment, electrodes on her temples, IVs in her arm, her speech slow and fragmented as technicians asked her to repeat invented personal details, new name, new hometown, fictional childhood events. Repetition. Conditioning. Langston played one final file. Cassidy again, but this time frantic, her eyes wide. To whoever finds this. I don't know if I'll survive this process, she said, her voice shaking. If my memory is gone, if I forget my children, my husband, my name, please find them. Tell them I didn't leave them. They took me. They made me forget. Adrian turned away from the screen, choking on a sob. Grayson sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as her body trembled. I left you, she said through clenched teeth. But not because I wanted to. They ripped it all away from me. No, Grayson whispered. You fought. You buried this. You tried to leave a trail. Langston closed the laptop. And now we know who did this. Lazarus Dynamics. Specifically, Dr. Elliot Knox. He runs a facility out of Denver. That's where the real files are kept. The backups. The project records. If we get them, we expose everything. Grayson met his gaze. Then that's where we go. Adrian wiped her face. I'm going with you. Langston hesitated. You sure you're ready for that? I've lived in a cage for 2 years, she said, her voice hardening. It's time I find the ones who built it. Grayson looked at her, really looked, and in that moment, the woman he'd lost was coming back to him. Not just physically. Not just in memory. But in fire, in spirit. That night, as the wind howled against the cabin walls, Cassidy Rose sat at the kitchen table, not as a waitress, not as a stranger, but as a mother and scientist who had survived the unthinkable. And now she was ready to take back everything they stole. They left the cabin just before dawn, leaving Randall and Livy under the watchful care of Langston's trusted friend, an ex-Marine named Celia Boone. Grayson hadn't wanted to bring the children this far into danger, and now, with the truth out in the open, there was no turning back. Denver wasn't just a destination, it was the battleground. And somewhere inside the towering headquarters of Lazarus Dynamics, the truth waited, hidden, encrypted, and dangerous. The drive was long and quiet. Cassidy stared out the window for most of it, her eyes scanning the wide Colorado plains with a kind of restless tension, like a soldier returning to a war zone she couldn't remember. The closer they got to Denver, the more fragments returned, the smell of the lab's sterilized hallways, the humming of fluorescent lights, and brief flashes of Elliot Knox's face, calm, clinical, and utterly void of remorse. Grayson drove with both hands on the wheel, knuckles tight. You don't have to go in there yourself, he said. I can do it. Langston's got blueprints. We know where the servers are. I do have to, Cassidy replied. It was me they experimented on. My memories, my identity, my family. I want to be the one to finish it. Langston had arranged everything from afar. Fake IDs, floor plans smuggled from a disgruntled ex-employee, and a security badge copied from a stolen scan. Lazarus operated under the guise of a biomedical tech company, secure, but not military grade. They would pose as IT consultants doing an emergency network inspection on behalf of a third-party subcontractor. Risky, but not impossible. By 1:17 p.m., Cassidy and Grayson were walking through the sleek glass entrance of Lazarus Dynamics. The receptionist barely looked up. With forged clearance and confident posture, they were waved through to the sublevel elevators. Cassidy's heart thudded like a war drum in her chest. Grayson touched her back lightly, grounding her. They descended to sublevel 3, the restricted archive vaults. The hall was cold and sterile, just like she remembered. A pair of security cameras tracked them silently as they walked to the terminal chamber marked recursion files, classified. Cassidy's hands were steady as she swiped the badge Langston had provided. The scanner blinked. Access granted. Inside, rows of locked servers blinked under low blue lights. Grayson stood watch while Cassidy approached the main console and inserted a custom drive Langston had prepared, a viral key that would extract, decrypt, and copy all documentation related to Project Recursion. The files appeared quickly. Rows of folders. Cassidy opened one labeled Subject Art 027. Her face stared back at her, before the experiments. Then during. Then heavily sedated, bound, eyes wide with fear. Each entry was a dagger. She clicked on the logs. One in particular caught her attention. Final directive, Dr. Knox. Subject 027 demonstrated resistance to full overwrite. Emotional anchors remain, husband, twins. Final recommendation, permanent memory suppression, relocation. Subject is to be monitored continuously. If memory resurfaces, termination protocols to be enacted. Cassidy's breath caught. Termination. She turned to Grayson. They were planning to kill me if I ever remembered. He didn't speak, just clenched his fists. The virus completed its job. The data had been pulled. Every document, video, and command file, copied. Suddenly, the lights above them flickered. Then sirens. A red strobe began to pulse in the corner of the ceiling. They know we're here, Grayson said, already moving toward the door. They ran. Alarms echoed through the halls as security teams mobilized above. Langston had warned them of a 10-minute window, now reduced to 5. Cassidy led the way, her memory now uncannily sharp, retracing steps she'd taken 2 years ago as a prisoner. In the stairwell, 2 armed guards appeared. Grayson tackled the first while Cassidy grabbed the other's baton and struck him across the jaw with stunning force. The guards went down hard. They sprinted to the underground garage where Langston waited in a stolen government SUV, engine running. As they slammed the doors shut and peeled out into the blinding afternoon sun, Cassidy looked back one last time. That building had taken everything from her. Now it was going to pay. Langston tossed her a tablet. Everything's uploaded. We leak it tonight. Media, federal watchdogs, international courts, you name it. And Knox? Grayson asked. Langston smirked. He's already been subpoenaed. This data just turned his empire into a house of cards. Cassidy sat back in the seat, winded, shaken, but alive in every sense. For the first time in years, she wasn't wondering who she was. She knew who she was. And she was going home. The news broke like a lightning strike. Within 24 hours of the leak, every major media outlet in the country was running the story, secret government-backed memory experiments exposed, victims speak out. Cassidy's recorded testimony, along with hundreds of internal documents from Project Recursion, flooded the airwaves and the internet. It was undeniable. Irrefutable. Names were named. Dates. Evidence. Video. What had once been a classified shadow operation was now a national scandal. Dr. Elliot Knox was arrested at his private estate outside Aspen just hours after the files went public. The footage of him being led away in handcuffs, his signature cold expression finally cracked with disbelief, went viral within minutes. Government officials scrambled to disassociate themselves. Congressional hearings were scheduled. A federal investigation was launched. Lawsuits followed, dozens of them. But none of that mattered to Cassidy more than what came next. Home. She stood in the doorway of Langston's cabin as the sun rose behind her, casting golden light across the trees. Grayson was unpacking bags inside. Randall and Livy were playing just a few feet away, making castles in the dirt, their laughter echoing in the quiet morning air. For a moment, she just watched them, those two small souls who had waited for her without knowing it. She remembered them now. Fully. Every moment. Every diaper, every late-night lullaby, every scraped knee and whispered comfort. It had come back in waves after they left Denver, violent, beautiful waves that broke against her with unstoppable force. Cassidy walked to them slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Livy looked up first. "Mommy?" she asked quietly. Cassidy knelt in the grass and opened her arms. Livy ran to her without hesitation, flinging herself into her mother's embrace. Randall followed a second later, clutching her tightly around the waist. Cassidy held them both, tears streaming down her face, no longer confused or scared, but whole. "I missed you," she whispered. "Every single day." Grayson stood nearby, watching the three of them with an expression that mixed awe and quiet relief. When Cassidy looked up at him, he walked over and sat beside her in the grass. "You came back," he said softly. She shook her head. "I never really left. They just buried me. But you kept me alive." They stayed like that for a long while, just the four of them, together again under the open sky, a family reunited by truth and resilience. No more lies. No more false names or stolen memories. Later that month, Cassidy testified before Congress. She stood strong, not as a victim, but as a witness. She told the world what had been done to her, to others. She became the face of the movement against unethical experimentation. Advocacy groups rallied behind her. Scientists who once worked in secrecy now feared exposure. Recursion, and everything tied to it, was dismantled piece by piece. Cassidy refused every interview offer that tried to sensationalize her trauma. She wasn't interested in fame, only in justice, and in healing. They moved to Oregon after the hearings were done. A small town with good schools, quiet mornings, and space to breathe. Grayson opened a local repair shop. Cassidy returned to teaching part-time at a community college, guiding young minds in biology and ethics, real, honest science. Every night, she read to Randall and Livy. And when the nightmares came, and sometimes they still did, Grayson would hold her hand until the darkness passed. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a mother. A wife. A survivor. And she had finally come home. In my view, the ending of this story speaks to the profound resilience of human identity and love. Cassidy's journey from erasure to remembrance is not just about recovering memories, it's about reclaiming purpose, motherhood, and the truth of who she is. What was stolen from her wasn't just her past but her very sense of self, and yet she fought her way back with courage, intelligence, and a mother's instinct that never truly died, even when her memory did. Grayson's loyalty is equally powerful, a portrait of quiet, unwavering devotion. He never let go of the belief that Cassidy was still out there, even when the world told him to move on. And in doing so, he held a space open for her return. The happy ending doesn't erase the trauma. But it honors it. Cassidy doesn't become who she was, but who she chooses to be now, stronger, more complete, and deeply grounded in love. The family isn't restored to what it was before, it's reborn into something richer because of what they endured together. Ultimately, the story reminds us that even when memory is stripped away, the bonds of love, truth, and identity can still survive, and with enough strength and help, they can lead us back home.